The Marquis de Sade is reborn, and his spirit has embraced you fully, suffocating your rational self and disappearing you into the intemperate, mocking you into celebrating barbarity, bestiality, perversions, stupidity, and cruelty. We have tumbled over the precipice of the divine and are now rotting in squalor made from men with brutal ideas. Our corpses piled up, our body parts used for experiments, our minds and hearts scoured and exposed for ruthless schemes that seem horrific yet cunningly benign. This is the new order of things. This is a slow creeping into an existence of non-existence, a radical negation of the other. This is the normalization of the splicing of our lives. This is sadism, and this is the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Jean Armory, who was in the Belgian resistance in World War II and who was captured and tortured by the Gestapo in 1943, defines sadism as the radical negation of the other, the simultaneous denial of both the social principle and the reality principle. In a sadist world, torture, destruction, and death are triumphant. And such a world clearly has no hope of survival. On the contrary, he desires to transcend the world, to achieve total sovereignty by negating fellow human beings, which he sees as representing a peculiar kind of hell.
To traverse this current landscape with any logic seems almost inscrutable. The piles of disclosures, information, sound bites, tragic circumstances, and shocking discoveries have one long, painstaking revelation after another, and after over 3 years of absorbing these sadistic revelations, you must be exhausted, or shell-shocked at the very least. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than because you are exhausted, frustrated, angry, and even vengeful. These are normal reactions for victims of sadism. Your vortex of emotions are justified. Sadists have been released and given free rein to reset every small portion of our lives. I have to tell you, though, the silos of people I've met along the way have both repulsed and fascinated me. The indifferent, the passionate, the concerned, the scientists, the experts in their field, the clueless, the researchers, the funny, the brave, the weak, the smug, the busy, the talented, and then there are those like me, the disconnected, yet somehow strangely connected to it all, as if avoiding shrapnel from a nearby collision or dirty bomb. I'm there. I see it unfolding before me, exploding practically in my face, and I'm watching all these characters being tossed to and fro by it, and I know I could easily be harmed by it, but I am somehow removed from it.
Why is it that the majority of people who have resisted these operations and all their encompassing apparatus that wrap like tentacles around our lives tend to be of the Christian faith? They quote Bible verses openly on their social media feeds and podcasts. They feel empowered to discuss how they walk with God, and they admonish people to get right with God and repent for falling for the evils of these marketing campaigns. Have they been given the gift of discernment when some non-Christians have not? Do some Christians recognize sadism for what it is, but then interpret it as Satanism? Personally, I think sadism has been creeping slowly into our defining natures for hundreds of years. I suppose it could go back to the founding of our country when we stole land based on lies that wasn't even ours. Is there anything more cruel than disrupting a culture that has created a balance between the earth and the effective socialization of human life and differing tribes within those lives? What sort of sadistic creature destroys harmony from within?
Since the United States was founded as a military outpost, a fiscal military state, then it stands to reason that even the way we rear up our children would be influenced by this. Some children suffered extreme corporal punishment in their formative years. This is sadistic enough. Then some children were forced to retrieve their own form of punishment. This is a new level of sadism. Are there any words in existence that can define what it means when a parent, gifted with the blessing of an innocent child, would insist that that child retrieve its own form of punishment? What would those children grow into as adults? Psychopaths? Sadists? Narcissists? Miraculously, some children who were forced to retrieve their own form of punishment grew up to be well-adjusted adults, often using humor as a means to overcome trauma of the past. Therefore, it came as no surprise to many of us when authoritarians started showing their true nature over 3 years ago, and it also wasn't surprising when they could no longer hide their sadistic nature, and when they started acting ridiculously, similar to those who demanded a child retrieve his or her own form of punishment. Those of us who recognized this behavior simply refused to cooperate. We'd seen this movie before as children, and we'd be damned if we were going to let this happen again as fully actualized adults.
Apparently, though, some had never been forced to retrieve their own form of punishment at the demands of a sadist. A friend texted me early on in the COVID operation, "Are you guys in lockdown yet?" I stared at the text message for a long while. The fact that this individual could so casually blurt out a term used to signify absolute oppression and tyranny of a free human was jarring. It's a prison term, not something that had ever been so normalized in day-to-day conversation. The irony that this person texted me just as we had wrapped quarantyranny was not lost on me. Then this person went on to chastise individuals who refused to wear a mask. I was shocked again, since a sadist in my past had smothered me with a pillow over my face for what must have been an eternity because I nearly lost consciousness. I associated mask wearing with a form of sadism. I didn't know how to respond to the rebuke of non-mask wearers, since I obviously would never ever wear one. Plus, I personally already had to show subservience to sadists as a child, as a human experiment being treated at Stanford Children's Hospital, to allegedly treat my rare autoimmune illness, which I was diagnosed with, after the rollout of the swine flu vaccine. Plus, some of us had already had to suffer through the sadistic pleasure of retrieving our own form of punishment from the demands of incoherent, authoritarian parent sadists. Why would we ever wear a mask to show subservience to sadists now? No way. We've already seen this horror movie, and we know how it ends. And when it was over, if it was ever going to be over, I never expected the sadists to apologize. Just like those who told their children to retrieve their own form of punishment never apologized for their sadistic behavior toward an innocent child. Personally, I have never received a sincere apology from a sadist, and so why in the world would any of us ever expect an apology from the sadist who foisted the COVID operation on us over 3 years ago?
A popular influential host of his own internet broadcast show once said that Americans all act like traumatized adult children of alcoholic parents. I saw evidence of this kind of post-traumatic behavior throughout the COVID operation. Adult children of alcoholics tend to be bonded to an unshakable trauma that shapes how they will turn out as adults. But not all children of alcoholic adults or abusive or narcissistic parents will grow up to be the same. Sometimes the trauma is too much to bear and they take their own life. Sometimes the trauma is so bad they become sociopaths or narcissists as a way to cope with the lifetime of sadistic behavior they were subjected to. But in retrospect, those kids who were sadistically told by their parents to retrieve their choice of punishment, albeit from a prescribed list of torture devices, belt, wooden spoon, coat hanger, instead should have just grabbed their plushie dolls and thrown them in their parents' faces. Even if such rebellious, self-affirming behavior would have elicited an even worse punishment, it would have been worth it. But they were just kids, obeying their parents. I suppose it's because we, as a collective traumatized society, kept allowing these people, these authority types, these sadists, who are nothing more than unstable, unbalanced individuals, we kept allowing them to shape us, to put the fear of God in us, to control and abuse us for their supply, then ghost us when we become inconvenient, or worse, when we start describing them.
So, Americans, with your apple pie and puppy dogs and baseball and grandma and family picnics and your constant reminders about how family is the most important thing in life, how the fuck did it get so bad? How did it ever get to the point where it was somehow okay for a brother to demand his sibling attend Thanksgiving dinner on the condition of a negative PCR test? And whoever said it was acceptable for a parent to demand a child retrieve their own punishment? And why was it ever acceptable for a successful cartoonist to be ghosted, ignored, and dismissed by his own family simply because he made a choice different than theirs? Or why is it okay for a mother to be so deeply hated and disrespected by her own children and her own siblings simply because of the choices she made? Incidentally, in all the examples I've given, and the countless people I've come across over the last few years who have suffered through the same anguish of being marginalized and ghosted by their own, the demographics are all the same. Middle to upper class individuals with education, jobs, stability, and something to show for their life.
But how did it get to the point that sadism was so normalized or even expected in the home or in the families of origin? Is this part of our culture, or does it indeed go all the way back to the founding of the country? Is it embedded in our DNA? This inheritance of abuse cycles, or even the deep-seated hatred that runs right through family bloodlines? Is this why the sudden rise of loneliness has pebbled our human landscape? Has the pain of sadistic interaction pushed us into places of solitude for fear of being yet another sadist supply? Sadists are defined as people who derive sick pleasure or even sexual gratification at inflicting pain or humiliation on others. There's a reason we chose to focus on sadism and use it to compare to child abuse in this video as opposed to narcissism. Narcissists torture and abuse as a means to punish and reassert their superiority on their victim. They want their victim to know their own narcissistic omnipotence and grandiosity. But sadists do it for pleasure.
This means we, as the intended victims, need to know the difference and need to identify which category our abusers fall into. Most people on the planet are narcissists, to be sure, and we've seen how narcissistic traits are now normalized in culture, especially corporate culture, and we've seen how narcissists have been emboldened to come out of hiding over the last 3 years, especially. They're everywhere. But like with all things depraved, narcissism eventually becomes passé and boring, and a new level of perversion starts to emerge out of the depths of this ongoing cancerous operation. The decision to call the COVID injection a vaccine was a marketing ploy to get the public to accept it willfully. The decision to label a deployed poison COVID-19 was that same marketing ploy. No one gets colds anymore or is simply feeling under the weather. They've also come to the sadistic marketing campaign where everything from headaches to a bad cough is COVID. Just like the tissue we use to sneeze into is called Kleenex, whether it's the Kleenex brand or not. In my opinion, this is something only a sadist could devise. It was necessary for the public to believe they were injecting something into themselves that would benefit public health. Also, under the guise of the 1986 Act and efforts made under the 2005 PrEP Act, the makers of the injection are shielded from any liability as long as that injection is marketed or commercialized as a vaccine. Sadistic, huh? When in reality, what millions of people have all allowed themselves to be injected with is prophylactic experimental gene therapy, which is the term the FDA had been calling from the very beginning of the COVID operation.
Durkheim asks a question, and the question is, what is it that drives individuals and societies to engage in acts of self-annihilation? Freud would later ask the same question in Civilization and Its Discontents, and Freud would frame it differently, but I think also helpfully, where he said that at any moment in time, both within individuals and societies, one of the primary forces was ascendant. Eros, the capacity to nurture, protect, and sustain life, and the death instinct, post-Freudians later called it thanatos, but the death instinct, that drive to annihilate every living system around you, including yourself. He writes this as Europe is devolving into fascism and ultimately war. And Durkheim, when he writes his book on suicide, he found that those communities and individuals who were least likely to engage in acts of self-destruction were those who had strong social bonds and provided space for individual self-expression and self-actualization. That was the greatest protection against collective or individual suicide.
And those who carried out acts of self-destruction had essentially come from communities where those social bonds, the communal structure, the capacity for self-actualization had been destroyed. And he used the word anomie to describe that state that propels people to engage in activities of self-immolation. And it's interesting how you translate anomie literally, means rulelessness, meaning, in essence, the rules that govern or the accepted rules of the social contract no longer function. So you work hard, you get a good education, you obey the law, you have the capacity to sustain your community and make it flourish, and you have the capacity to fulfill yourself as an individual. When those contracts are broken, then you are thrust into a state of anomie, what sociologists call diseases of despair.
With cunning manipulation and violations of linguistics and law, the sadists have somehow allocated their own dysfunctional view of the world onto us. I truly believe, for instance, individuals who felt they had never contributed anything of value to society were used by these sadists to feel they were finally contributing something worthy to the world when they wore a mask or stood 6 feet apart from others. Only a sadist with a practiced skill could zero in with such precision on a person's private inner conflict and secret feelings of worthlessness and then exploit them for obscene profit.
For instance, a young, intellectually challenged mother we know personally, and whose child is the product of a rape with an abusive and sadistic boyfriend, could not even articulate her own feelings of worthlessness and trauma. At best, she is tolerated by her family, who don't understand the full value of therapy and how it offers tools to work through trauma. She often posts on her social media page how she is unloved. She wears it like a badge of honor. Because of this unresolved trauma, job opportunities are scarce, and when she finally is hired at some service-level job, she is scapegoated and let go with no understanding of why. Each day she struggles to maintain her value and worth to the world. When the COVID operation was announced, suddenly her spirits brightened, her sense of self-worth grew stronger, and her value to the world increased. She walked upright with purpose, proudly. She, like any successful CEO of a company or the respectable characters on TV, was also wearing a mask and doing her part. She dutifully allowed herself to be injected, twice, and suddenly found her value in this world. She was going to fight this deadly invisible pathogen, and in doing so, prove her value to the world. This is what I mean when I say the sadists had a cunning way of zeroing in on a person's unspoken sense of worthlessness and could exploit it for their own operation.
Most doctors and scientists are unclear that there are still sadists at play here. Even if on the right side of history, they begin their arguments or evidence that the COVID-19 vaccine is harmful by announcing their fealty to vaccines in general. This isn't helping. They forget about the sadist who began this, Dr. Neil Ferguson, who manufactured a panic across the world by programming a computer simulation and then announced to all governing bodies in the world that this computer simulation was a real virus. Now, to add injury to this first insult to our intelligence, we were told we needed the spike protein from what they were marketing as the virus to damage us enough so our bodies could respond by kickstarting our immune system. But these same scientists and doctors, have known what is being called a spike protein can be manipulated and can cause all sorts of bad outcomes. They've known this since 2016, when research conducted by master sadist himself, Ralph Barrick, at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, made these experiments in gene therapy public. Then Barrick's sadist buddies, Francis Collins and Kizzy Corbett, came along and took a computer simulation of what was being called the spike protein, which is basically a theory for messenger RNA, to make it possible for pharmaceutical companies to inject that spike protein. So what this means is the COVID-19 injection so many willfully allowed themselves to be injected with is based on a computer game and adding adjuvants and all sorts of garbage and biologics from weapons programs that date back to 2005. They've created what amounts to a weapons factory, manufacturing and transmitting weapons-grade biologic onto its host, you, as well as those who come in contact with the host, also you. What I've just described is a marketing campaign created for the public to partake in what they believe is a prophylactic or protection from a virus, with the possibility of positive outcomes from gene therapy. But what it really is a bioweapon. And this marketing campaign is not coming from altruistic pharmaceutical companies rushing to market something that will save the human race from variants or viruses. These are not nice people trying to do good things. This is the work of sadists, not Satanists. This is the work of sadists.
As your genes are edited, and some injected bodies are now a weapons factory, it's only natural for the self-loathing to begin. Sadists don't want you to experience consciousness or self-awareness. They don't want you questioning your choices so that you can make better choices in the future. But instinctively, you will experience consciousness anyway, and through instinct alone, become self-aware even if you don't fully realize it. It's this unspoken subconscious understanding, never being fully articulated or cemented in your mind, where self-loathing actually comes from. Sadists want you to feel unloved. They want you too sick to be loved. They want you harmed and disfigured. They want you ashamed and anxious about the body you were born into, or the body you are experiencing as it responds to the gene therapies you've been convinced you need. Sadists want all things wonderfully made to be distorted and inverted. Everything from your sense of place to your sense of self becomes unrecognizable to you and vulnerable to attack. As long as this marketing ploy, these violations of linguistics and law, and these experimental gene therapies are allowed to continue, the sadist plan can move forward seamlessly into the next phase of what they want in the evolution of humans. But before we trek into that territory, let's go back a few years.
One of the most sadistic rules rolled out at the beginning of the COVID operation was the 6-foot rule. Stickers and signs were posted everywhere, and the psychological effects of enforcing an idiotic, non-scientific rule on the general population took its toll and laid the groundwork for human loathing, whether those human species want to admit it or not. Although the 6-foot rule is no longer enforced, certain people still follow it without even realizing it, and certain people follow it under a different name. Yesterday, the 6-foot rule was rolled out to avoid catching a virus. Today, that 6-foot rule is enforced in civil society in the name of inclusivity or equity. For instance, a friend who occasionally attends a yoga class in Albany, New York, talks about how she and other white women are forced to do yoga at the very back of the class, cramped and uncomfortable, often bumping into each other when they are doing their stretching or poses. The front of the class, near the windows and fresh air, about 6 feet away from them, is reserved for people of color and individuals who identify as trans. Since the front of the room is typically empty, my friend asked the instructor if she and some of the other women could spread out a bit, and he said, "No, because what if those others who need their safe space show up late?" So this not only breeds a sense of unfairness and resentment within the class, but it also carries over that original harebrained 6-foot rule. Many women in the yoga class are perfectly fine giving lots of room to others who need their safe zone, because they've already been indoctrinated into this idea of the 6-foot rule. This trick of enforcing fealty to nonsensical instructions is a mastery of sadism. Only a sadist could take something so incoherent and turn it into something that represents civil law or proper etiquette in real life.
What other blocks of natural life are we willingly cutting out of our human experiences to push us further and further away from what it means to be the species that we are? If you look at the entirety of the situation, it's the normalization of sadism and how we, as U.S. citizens, have been forced to react to it. How does one respond to maliciously calculated sadistic acts? What's the goal of the sadists? It's not pretty, so we must admit that we may have all had a part in enabling the sadists. The calculated manner in which various social movements have marketed the idea that humans must loathe their own existence in relation to the planet and each other has been a covert act of sabotage on us, the human race.
We must compress ourselves into oppression in order to live at an equal pace with others who have been generationally or culturally oppressed. As humans, though, it is our instinct to grasp hands and pull each other out of oppression cooperatively. But the sadists insist we must compress ourselves into lethargy, inactivity, and reduce ourselves into eating lab-made food and succumb to the addictions of dopamine hits that come with a draining social media account, falling into that addictive tech existence in order to stand in solidarity with the earth, for we are told we are the virus and that the earth cannot live with us, so we must close ourselves off from the earth and live inside our dwellings addicted to our screens. When in reality, humans and the earth have thrived since the beginning of time, throughout the ages in a mutually advantageous ecosystem of life and death and the cycle of seasons and birth. We breathe with the earth, and the earth thrives with us. Like the small birds that peck at the fur of the deer, used to build out their nests when the deer's fur becomes too thick for the season, so are we, the species that work with an ecosystem to keep it in balance. These are instinctual practices that bring life and joy and abundance, yet these practices are being flogged out of us by the very sadists who have anointed themselves high priests of our human evolution. We may be allowing ourselves to be spliced socially and existentially to normalize the idea of splicing our own DNA. in a lab.
When it comes to sadists, there's an end goal, and that end goal of this entire exercise is to introduce us to the idea that we must evolve beyond our human selves, and the technology to do that is happening right under our noses. Technology in the injections, technology we hold in our hands, technology we wear on our bodies, it all introduces us to an editing experience where ecology, human interactions, and that coupling with nature is spliced out and replaced with technology we are tricked into believing we need. When the splicing and replacing becomes normalized on a social scale, such as standing 6 feet apart instead of grasping hands, or wearing a mask instead of sharing a smile or a kiss, then it will be widely accepted on a scientific scale as well, and sadistic men with trillions of dollars on the line will continue to play God, and the human species itself will be sliced and diced to create a new breed.
And that technology used to play God is CRISPR-Cas9, a laboratory tool used to change or edit pieces of the cell's DNA. CRISPR-Cas9 uses a specially designed RNA molecule to guide an enzyme called Cas9 to a specific sequence of DNA. Cas9 then cuts the strands of DNA at that point and removes a small piece, causing a gap in the DNA where a new piece of DNA can be added. This perversion of improving human DNA is nothing more than what Freud described as the death instinct.
The sadists would have you believe that humans have been made irrelevant, are reprehensible, and need an upgrade. Slicing DNA sequences out of the strand and replacing them with new DNA is apparently the cure to the reprehensible human, when really it's just a move closer to the death of the human race. A massive psychological operation infusing money into ruthless marketing campaigns celebrating and exploiting the death instinct has been imposed onto society, sometimes in subtle ways, but also sometimes in obvious ways. Behind the celebration of assisted suicide or the idea that we all have expiration dates, geneticists are working hard to fine-tune the CRISPR-Cas9 technology. This, combined with the recent FDA approval of Neuralink to study the trials on human brain implants, begs the question that sadists are impatiently waiting for us to ask. Are we enough? Are we enough?
Apparently we aren't enough. NVIDIA, a dominant supplier of artificial intelligence hardware and software, ultimately received a multi-billion-dollar infusion through the March 27, 2023 Defense Production Act for the distribution of printed circuit boards and advanced packaging production capability. The death instinct re-inhabits the subconscious as a move toward AI replaces human intelligence, human interaction, human relatability, and human wonders, expressed once through a human soul and instinct. The explosion of the population of neurodivergent humans, the sharp increase in miscarriages, thus contributing to the decline of the population, the infiltration of sociopathy and narcissism in our corporate culture and government operations, the sudden disappearance of a functioning workforce, the largest transfer of wealth in history taking place within the last 3 years, giving rise to austerity and desperation among the remaining human population, all converge under one centralized theme: sadism. It means to undermine natural evolution or the quickening of the spirit or instinct that lies within.
These methodical attacks on the human experience are breaking everything down, even human DNA, to reset or rebuild into something new, something rational, something pragmatic and rules-based, something that has no nuance and requires no conversation that may include backstories of trauma. So what we have to do is remain radically human, sincerely diligent in accepting our faults, break the rules, embrace the divine, pull ourselves off our computer screens, break addictions, walk in forgiveness, shrug off the petty, and live in an extreme place of human love, kindness, empathy, and forgiveness. We must surround ourselves with human art, the healing earth, and rejoice in all aspects of our lives, for it makes us human, not benign. We can peacefully starve the sadist out of existence, stop being their supply, smash a system that is working diligently to eat us down to our marrow, and take this moment to truly thrive.